Greetings, I'm Richard Chambers, President and CEO of the Institute of Internal Auditors. Welcome back to another of my videos that I'm calling Insights and Advice for Internal Audit. In this series, I'm having conversations with a number of leaders and thought leaders from the internal audit profession from around the world. You know, we've had at least 80 chairmen during the course of our history, but none has probably had a more interesting or perhaps challenging year than our guest today, Mike Joyce, who is the chairman of the board of the IIA. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Richard. It's nice to be here with you today.
Good. Mike has been the chairman since July of 2019. Outside of the IIA, he has a very important role to play. He is the vice president and chief auditor of audit and compliance for the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association, and he's based in Chicago, Illinois. Mike, what do you think? It's been a challenging year, right?
Well, it's certainly not the year I envisioned, and I'm sure that's probably true for all of us as well.
I was going to say, I can tell you we're very fortunate at the IIA to have had your leadership during this challenging period for us.
Well, thank you. You know, it's a real privilege, right, to lead this organization, no matter the situation. And as you know, before the pandemic started, I did have the opportunity to travel last year and visit some of our affiliates. And I have to tell you, I was always impressed with the enthusiasm and the passion that our volunteers and our members demonstrate in their daily jobs. But one of the things I was not expecting to see, I guess, or be reminded of as much was the notion of courage. What I mean by that is we have a lot of auditors around the world that audit through adversity all the time, whether or not it's government suppressing their findings or corruption or boards that aren't doing their fiduciary duties. We have a tendency in audit to kind of push through and persevere. So while this pandemic certainly is a completely different level of adversity, I'm pretty confident that our members are going to be able to see their way through it.
Well, that's good news, and I'm delighted to hear that you feel that there's a lot of great things going on out there in the profession. Is there anything that you saw during your year as chairman so far that gives you any concern about the profession, particularly in the face of this pandemic?
Well, I think the one thing, and this is hard to gauge, would be if there's any lack of flexibility, I think we're going to be hurting ourselves. It's very easy to get into a routine and become complacent, and this is clearly not the time that we're going to stick to our normal audit plans. This is probably not the time that we're going to consider business as usual. Anecdotally, I know that there are audit departments that have actually shared or shifted some of their resources to help shore up other operational areas of the organization. Something we probably wouldn't necessarily consider in normal times, but I think we have to be able to demonstrate our value no matter what. And we have to be proactive in reaching out to our constituents, saying, hey, we're here to help, and there are things that we can do beyond our routine assurance work. So I think that's what we need to continue to maintain, that flexibility.
Mike, we're getting to a phase in this health crisis where companies and entire regions of the world are starting to try and return to some normalcy. Companies are trying to bring employees back into the workplace in some cases, and there's a lot of uncertainty there. There are a lot of risks associated with that. Any advice that you might offer to internal auditors on what roles they can play?
Well, yeah, I would probably, first of all, start that off as my role as an internal audit manager, right? So for my staff, I think, again, flexibility is going to be the name of the game. You're right, a lot of organizations, including ours, are looking at different ways to bring folks back into the workforce. And, in many ways, it was much easier for us to stop work immediately than it's going to be to start work again, because the world has changed a little bit. So I don't think it's going to be a one-size-fits-all. So I want to make sure that with my staff, each of whom have different personal situations, perhaps different levels of comfort, I think they've demonstrated that we can work remotely when we have to. And so we want to be sensitive to that. If I put my internal audit hat on in terms of the rest of the organization, I think these decisions and how we bring employees back needs to be a group effort. So I'd want to make sure that the right people are involved. This is clearly an HR issue, but it's also facilities, it's legal, it's our IT environment. So I think we need to make sure we have the right people at the table, making the decisions, coordinating with our local governments, and realizing that this is not going to be a flip the switch kind of endeavor.
Mike. We at the IIA, we are doing a lot of things to make the kinds of services and activities that we create for the internal audit profession to make them more easily attainable. We're creating virtual conferences. We're creating e-learning seminars. And of course, we're also have rolled out testing at home for the CIA. Why do you think it's important for internal auditors to continue to take advantage of continuing education and enhancing their own credentials during this period?
Well, there's never a bad time to continue to improve yourself. So I think for a lot of reasons, one of them is sort of practical. We have deferred many of our audits, as I'm sure others have. And so I've told my staff, if you have any downtime, let's front load our training. Let's do that now because we've got more time probably now than at the end of the year when we're trying to catch up. I think from a skill set standpoint, you always want to stay current. You want to stay marketable. Unfortunately, in times like this, we have heard anecdotally of some organizations that have outsourced their audit functions or furloughed them. So, folks may find themselves in the job market, and I think the more current you are with your skills, the better prepared you're going to be. The IA has done a terrific job in some of the training that you've put out recently, very timely on specific COVID-19 responses and ideas. So that's the kind of things, again, that I think can help us bring quick value to our organizations. So, again, kudos to you and the staff for being so quick to get that education out to us.
Well, thank you. And it's been a joint effort. Our board has been very supportive of us throughout this process. And thank you for that leadership. Your theme this year was auditing in tune, where, and I noticed you have your guitar handy in the background there, just in case we ask you to play something for us. But instead, I'm going to ask you today to just share with me, how do you see the need for the kind of integration and collaboration and cooperation that you outline in your chairman's theme? How do you think that is even more important in this environment?
Well, it's critical. There's always a danger when you're isolated like we are to lose touch with your colleagues, both people you work with as well as your professional colleagues. And so I've been very gratified that fortunately today we've got the technology that allows us to communicate like this. So I know internally within our organization, we're doing a very strong effort to continually touch base with our staffs. Our organization has been having all employee meetings. When you've got 1,500 people via video, it's a little bit of a different experience, but it's really important that we keep in touch the way we do. Now, for me, the IA has always been a great resource because of the network of colleagues that we've got, whether or not it's our local chapter, affiliates within countries, IA headquarters. I can't tell you over the last 6 weeks how many emails I've exchanged with IA colleagues, just seeing how they're doing and also asking what they're doing and trying to get ideas from them and sharing ideas with them as well in terms of how do we respond, what kind of audits are you putting off. So it's just a tremendous network. I think that's maybe the understated value of membership. Training is obviously very important, but to me, it's always been the network and the relationships that really makes this organization special.
Thanks, Mike. I couldn't agree with you more. Let me ask you one last question. And no one has any crystal ball, so there is no wrong answer. How do you think the profession is going to be different coming out of this crisis? What do you think has happened that maybe is going to change the face of our profession and the way we carry out our responsibilities going forward?
Well, I think a couple things. Of course, the immediate future, a little hard to read, but I think clearly the concept of work from home is going to stick with us. Now, personally, that was nothing I had embraced previously. This is the first time I've ever, in my 37-year career, worked from home. But I have now been converted to the idea that it can be done for audit. It's not ideal. I don't believe it would work 100% of the time, but I'm certainly much more open and flexible to the idea of staff members working remotely because I can see that it can be done. I think a really big change is going to be our whole risk assessment approach and the level of detail that we get into it. I'm sure many of us in our risk assessment, whether or not it was in enterprise risk management approach or our audit risk assessment, may have had the word pandemic in there somewhere, and it may have said low risk, high impact, and we never thought more about that. And I'd love to meet the individual, if there is any, that actually predicted an outcome like what we're seeing, where you've got a simultaneous global self-imposed shutdown of commerce, right? That's probably something that hadn't been anticipated. But the genie's out of the bottle now. And I think we're going to have a lot of lessons learned about companies' disaster recovery, business resumption. I think supply chain disruption is going to be a focus. Levels of reserves organizations may need to maintain, your square footage, your footprint, your commercial real estate. All these things are open to I think, revisiting, because now that we've seen this thing that could never happen has happened, right? We need to be prepared. It could happen again. And certain industries, particularly, of course, the healthcare industry, I think are really going to have to do some soul searching and reevaluate the risk assessment. And I think, what we've done in the past can't be faulted, but I think we need to learn from this and move on. So I do see some real leaps, I think, in terms of the timeliness of assessment, the kinds of areas that maybe we wouldn't have thought of before being open for discussion. So to me, that's the most immediate change I see coming.
Well, I think you've got some excellent insights there, and I think only time is going to tell just how much it's going to change us. But I agree with you. I don't think we're going back to the way we used to do things, and I think that we're all going to be better for it. Mike, thank you so much for joining me in our conversation today, and I really do appreciate and value all that you've contributed to the IA this year, and look forward to working with you through these remaining months of your term as chairman of the board.
Well, thanks, Richard. The feeling's mutual. And again, as a member, we appreciate the guidance and counsel that we get from the IA. So keep up the good work.
I'm Richard Chambers, President and CEO of the Institute of Internal Auditors. Thanks for joining us.